This portion is called Vayera, which means, and he appeared. The Lord is referring to the time that he appeared to Abraham. It covers from Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 through to chapter 9, verse 35. Now, in the previous portion, Shemot, meaning names, Moses was sent to Pharaoh to command him to release the children of Israel, but his mission was an abject failure. Not only did Pharaoh flatly refuse, worse still was the fact that the slavery of the Jews was made even worse. Pharaoh stopped their supply of straw and made them go and find it themselves, but the output of bricks was to remain the same as before. Well, it turned out that they couldn't even find straw, but had to settle for mere stubble, which would have to be cut from the fields, probably at night, on their hands and knees. It was back-breaking, heartbreaking work. It was hard work. And this was all because Moses had spoken to Pharaoh. As you can imagine, Moses was not the flavour of the month, as they say nowadays. Or Moses went straight back to God and complained about the result, querying the wisdom of the strategy. Don't you just love Moses' relationship with God? He could speak to him in this familiar way, and he complained to him. But God reassured Moses that he would cause Pharaoh to release the people. And in this portion that we're reading now, Moses is commissioned to return to Pharaoh and deliver an even stronger message. Or put yourself in Moses' place. The people don't like him, and Pharaoh is proud and powerful. But Moses goes. Well, he goes to the people and delivers the message from God, but they don't exactly accept his words with enthusiasm because they are physically worn out and they're close to being spiritually broken. In fact, there is a Hebrew phrase for it, kotzer ruach, meaning broken spirit, worn out. At such a time, the last thing you want to hear is a cheerful message from the very person who is responsible for the increase in your suffering. I know it wouldn't have been funny at the time, but I can't help smiling at the irony that this man comes back with this cheerful message and expects the people to receive it. Well, of course, he didn't really, but God said, we'll do it anyway. And Moses, being the faithful servant of the Lord, went and did exactly as he was told. Oh, that we would be faithful as Moses was. Well, anyway, to cut a long story short, Moses does what God tells him, with the result that things just keep getting worse and worse for the Jews, and for that matter, for the Egyptians as well, which is interesting. Bring this up to our own day, for instance. The increased burden of petty legislation, tax increases across the board, and restrictions of our freedom are signs that God is applying pressure on the demonic forces of this world, and they are squirming. In fact, and this is the interesting part, nobody is better off. The Israelites weren't better off, the Egyptians weren't better off, we aren't better off, and neither are the would-be rulers of this world better off. We can expect continuing plagues upon the wicked governments. They simply will not be able to rule, as their own parties fragment around them and whistleblowers expose their indiscretions and endless hypocrisies. In fact, we've already seen a lot of this and have come to expect it, and it's in every branch of authority. The whole thing is falling apart, even as the Egyptians received plague after plague. You see, wickedness is a house divided against itself. It cannot stand. My point being, take heart, Christian. Their day is coming, and they will bring it upon themselves without us falling into sin. We can rest in the Lord. If our lives are becoming uncomfortable, theirs are worse. We have peace within. We have Jesus close by. Be still and know that I am here with you. Well, Moses and, of course, Jesus are tremendous examples of boldness for us in these last days of increasing godlessness in the world and apostasy, unfortunately, in the church. Who will speak up for the Lord in this climate of unbelief? It was like that in the time of Isaiah the prophet. He said, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, here am I, send me. Isaiah 6:8. What lovely music to God's ears that must have been. Here was a man eager to take up the challenge of unpopularity, even martyrdom. He was in fact martyred for speaking the truth. But we know what his answer would have been if, as they were taking him to his death, we had asked him, would you volunteer again, Isaiah? He would say something like, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Of course, that's from Romans chapter 8. But Paul wrote that before he was martyred. The word martyr actually means witness. They witnessed to a glorious reality that outshines this one infinitely, infinitely. The true people of God have what the world hasn't got. We've got conviction and an eternal purpose, a meaning to our lives that goes beyond this mere existence. Jesus said that we would be his witnesses, John 15. Now, I don't mean that we'll all be martyred, but that even now, in showing faith, trust, and, if possible, joy in our difficulties, we are bearing witness to the reality of Jesus. The world needs to see these things, especially in times of difficulty, and that's why God has placed us here, just such a time as this. Well, one of my favourite stories is of a man, the owner of a business. He's an atheist, and he's packing up early to leave the office. Where are you going, sir? Asked one of his employees. I'm going to hear Spurgeon preaching in the town hall, he replied. But you don't believe in God, came the perplexed reply. No, he said, but Spurgeon does. You see, people adrift on the leaden sea of these days need to see lighthouses. Lighthouses shedding spears of light into the gloom. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God unto salvation. Romans 1:16. That was a spear of light, the way Spurgeon's confident preaching struck the atheist. And by the way, why did Paul even have to mention not being ashamed? Because it's a natural frailty that many of us have in the harsh face of the world. And God understands. But Moses and Spurgeon and Paul had fought that fight against the flesh and put it to death. And that's what we must do. They delivered the message that God had entrusted to them, and they received honours in glory. You can bank on it. Well, Moses had opposition from his own broken people and hatred from a godless ruler, but he was a majority because God was with him, and one finger of God is greater than all the despotic governments of all the nations, past, present, and future, including our own. Let us walk in their steps, as Mordecai said to his niece, Esther. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. Will you be the one, will I be the one to answer to the call, to be a light in the darkness?